Today is October 16th, 2013, and we are interviewing Ivan Maris at the Illinois State Library. Mr. Maris was born March 26, 1931, in Bullpit, Illinois. My name is Cheryl Walker, and I will be interviewing Mr. Maris. Mr. Maris, could you state for the record what war and branch of service you served in?
I served in the Korean War in the Army, infantry,
Okay, and what was your highest rank?
the staff sergeant when I got out.
Okay. Would you like to share your story with us?
Okay, I was drafted in 1952. The draft board let me finish college at ISU in Normal, Illinois, and I was drafted that fall in 1952. Of course, I was hoping just to serve the 2 years and get out of the service and serve my time instead of joining for 4 years. And I was going to plan on being a farmer, but it didn't happen that way. But anyway, when I was drafted, I was sent up to Michigan and to get our assignments for basic training. Fort Custer, that's what it was, Fort Custer in Michigan. And when we were given our assignments, I got assigned Fort Knox, Kentucky. And knowing that it was an armored division there at Fort Knox, I would ride a tank. I was very pleased about that part. But when I got down to Kentucky at Fort Knox, found out it was not riding the tanks. We were all infantry basic training. We had 8 weeks of the basic training and then 8 more weeks of advanced infantry basic training where you shot all and you fired all the weapons and were well trained. Never did ride a tank. Never. So I was kind of disappointed there. And then I was assigned for shipment for overseas. Went to Seattle, Washington, and got on a troop ship there. We landed in Sasebo, Japan. And of course, having a college degree and being young, I was very cocky. I figured it was no problem. I'd have an office job with my college degree, but it did not happen that way. In Sasebo, Japan, overnight we were getting our shots, new uniforms, weapons, and got on the same troop ship and landed several days or a few days, very soon it seems like, in Incheon on landing barges because you couldn't land the ship in the harbor at the time of tides. But we were on landing barges in Incheon, got on trains at night, and within a short period of time was on the front lines. So like I said, I think it's made a believer out of me. I didn't realize that things would happen so quick. But thank goodness the war was ended in 3 months. And of course, I have to mention one other thing. Back in '52, though, when I voted, since I was raised a Democrat, Eisenhower, of course, was running for president, and he said he was going to stop the war, and I voted for him, even though he was a Republican, and he did stop the war. And so I have to mention that. But like I said, at 3 months the war was over. It was very intense fighting, especially the month of July. Our, like I said, I was with the Puerto Rican Regiment, and supposedly the winter of '52 and '53, many of these Puerto Ricans ran off the lines. And so what they did, they put in fellows from the states like me, all over the United States, state of Washington, California, Massachusetts, Connecticut. They were all in our outfit. I had only one other person that I knew of in our regiment from Illinois and Chicago. I'm still with contact with him. But anyway, this regiment, the Puerto Rican regiment, was well known for bravery and had won many awards in the early part of the Korean War. But due to the draft, the experienced, well-trained fellows were sent back home and replaced by these draftees, which were scared, got the fighting, and did what they did. And so they put in fellows from the States like me, and in fact, that is the last unit ever to be integrated, because the Puerto Ricans were strictly all Puerto Rican regiment before. They were segregated. They were, so to speak, okay. Just like the blacks after World War II were finally integrated to the service. They were mixed with all of us. Well, the Puerto Ricans in 1953, like I said, I was involved with the integration of the Puerto Rican regiment, and of course it was a different situation. Like I said, I didn't know any Spanish, and of course many of them did. Of course, they speak English, the officers and that, and because they're trained in the schools in Puerto Rico to speak, for English, but many of the comrades didn't speak English, and that was a scary situation. But like I said, we were above the 48 parallel all the time. 38 parallel, isn't it? I'm kind of forgetting here, and all during those 3 months of fighting the Chinese, what we were doing, and of course North Koreans, and I didn't realize till just a few months ago, reading the military magazines, how bad a situation I was in till now at this late in game. They knew they were going to sign a truce in July there, and the ones with of course, with the territory that they had would be assigned to them at the end of the war. So what they were trying to do, they pushed all the Chinese they could at us and North Koreans to gain more territory. And so, like I said, it was a nasty situation there for a few weeks, even though we did stop them from gaining hardly any territory at all. And of course, at the end of the war, that's where the line was drawn. And like I said, this all took place above the 38 parallel all this time. And I didn't realize how bad a situation I was in. In fact, I always think, well, I shouldn't even be here today. But I didn't, realize at the time. But anyway, after the end of the war, the idea of college education paid off. They must have checked my records, realizing I was a teacher, and there were several others that were drawn from the different regiment, just different companies of the regiment, and who had college education, not necessarily teaching, but they had a college education. So there were about, I'd say a half a dozen of us that we started tent schools. We had approximately, if I remember, about 6 tents, so a classroom in each tent. And we had plywood desks. We made out of plywood and blackboard plywood. And this was called the Hanson Education Center. And I think we were the only ones that I know of in our 3rd Division that had a school like this, because to teach English, and there were so many of them couldn't read or write. And what would happen after the war, these troops would be trained constantly in the hills, so to speak. We always said, run the hills for training purposes. And they would come, the ones that needed education, and there were, I guess, quite a few of them, but would come half a day to us. And then in the other half a day would be another group would come in. And of course, in fact, we even taught night school too for high school advancements. And another thing I was taught too, I only had a high school typing education, a typing class, and they were short on company clerks, typists in the different companies, and so they brought in some old typewriters, and at night I would teach typing to recruits so they could have, for company clerks. So, like I said, I had only typing class in high school, but that was enjoyable because I remember the typing class back in the high school. It wasn't too many years previously. So that's what we did, and like I said, we were in tent schools. I felt very lucky because I didn't have to run the hills, training all the time. Cold winters, we were, at least we had a little stove in the tent. And as time went on, of course, I would hope to get home with points. Of course, you'd get more points when you were up on the front lines. And I did have enough points to get home with, let's say, within a 12-month period. But they wouldn't let me go home because I was close to being discharged, I guess. And so I had to stay another 4 months. I was there a total of 16 months in Korea. And of course, I wasn't very happy with the Army at that because of that, keeping you over there. A lot of things happened at home that wouldn't have taken place if I got home on time. But anyway, that's what happened. And of course, when I got out of the service, they asked me to, up in Chicago where I got discharged, to join the reserves. And nope, I didn't want no part of the Army. I hated the Army at that time. And it just, it was a bad situation there. I'm sorry for it today because I should have joined the reserves. I dropped my insurance at the time. That was a mistake, and because I was highly irritated at the time. But as time went on, of course, I got involved with teaching, and of course, I wasn't going to be a teacher. I was going to be a farmer. But my wife was at this Kincaid's high school. She was a secretary at the time. I knew her. She was a freshman in high school when I was a senior, and so I just barely knew her. But anyway, the principal at the time asked me to teach. They needed a teacher in chemistry, physics, and math because you taught all the things in a small high school there. And I was farming with my dad, and I said, well, I'll do it for a year or two just for the experience. And of course, my wife was secretary. We dated the first year, and of course, all the time, in my mind, I would not be a teacher. But when we came home from our honeymoon in we got married August 18th of that year. And when we came home from the honeymoon, of course, at that time, school started after Labor Day, back in those days. The school board president came up to us and said one of us had to leave because I figured, well, we're going to had it made because she was the secretary. I was teaching and farming with my dad, and we had a little house trailer, and so that irritated me. I wasn't too pleased about that. But Edinburgh, which was about 5 miles cross country from Kincaid, needed a second grade teacher at the time, and she had a 2-year junior college from Springfield Junior College at the time, and they asked her if she would teach, be interested in teaching there. And of course, that's what she did. She started teaching there. At that time, you could get a permit, and of course, she went on to school. She got a doctor's degree before I did. All those years, we kept on going to school, and I stayed with teaching because, well, it was a good way to raise kids because we were home early, not working till 5 o'clock like the state workers and so on do, and miners, whatever. We were home with the kids when it was an ideal situation, we thought. And I stayed with teaching, and of course I have 47 years right now under my belt. It just so like I said, it's amazing me that I didn't plan on it. But what I don't know.
When you were dropped off in Korea, did any of the men that you were with on that boat, did they go to the same battalion with you?
Really, I don't know because it seemed like I was the only one. I remember we were traveling on this troop train at night, scared to death, and of course you could see most of the fighting was done at night. It's just like 4th of July every night at that time, and you're scared to death. You got your rifle there handy, and because you can be stopped by the enemy. We didn't know. And then they put us in trucks, open trucks, and to take us to our different regiments. And so I never got acquainted with any of the fellows that were with me at that time. We just you didn't get acquainted until you were assigned to a company. All I know, all I remember along the road, the ambulances were coming, and then some of them were stopped, and they pulled out some wounded soldiers, and I was scared to death all the time. I was in fear. I knew where we were headed for, and just I was in fear all the time at that time. In the beginning.
Do you feel that when you went to basic, that you were young and you got trained on all those weapons, but do you think you got trained enough on frontline fighting?
I don't think so. You never get trained. You just have to experience it. You have to get the best training, I guess. But it did help, though. I'll have to say, all those various weapons that we were trained with, and all the physical training too. That, of course, that you were well in shape. You were in good shape, and you had to be, especially in Korea there. And talk about training, I did 3 years ago. I was invited to Puerto Rico, and to see my old regiment. Now, see, they took the colors away from the 65th Infantry Regiment at the time in that war because of the situation. But they gave the colors back 2 or 3 years later because the regiment had such a good name. And then a few years after the war, the regiment became a National Guard unit in Puerto Rico. So right now it's a 65th Infantry National Guard unit. And it's interesting to know how I got down there because I like to travel. And I was at the National Guard. When I found out they were a National Guard unit, I went out to the National Guard unit out here in Springfield. And I said, I'd sure like to visit my old regiment because it was interesting. The information officer contacted the information officer down there, and that same day I got a phone call inviting me from Puerto Rico, inviting me down there, and several months later I did fly down there, and they wined and dined me down there, showing me the places where the 65th trained, especially that because they gave me the story of what happened. They said at the start of the Korean War, this regiment was well trained in these hills, and they showed me the hills. It was just like Korea down there in this part of Puerto Rico. And the general that was was doing the training made sure that they did it right. He wouldn't run those troops through those hills. They didn't do it right. He'd make them do it over and over again. And that's why the regiment was well trained at the beginning of the war. It was like I said, well rewarded and well known. But I guess as time went on, the young draftees, young kids, they didn't want any part of the war. It is, and that's what happened. That's when we integrated that regiment with the fellows from the States here.
When you, after the war was over, and you were told that you were going to be teaching these young men, which was probably not any younger than you, um, teaching them English. Did you have books? Or did they bring in books? How did you teach them?
We did have books. We had the English books. We had writing books. We had basic math books. This was brought in, right, through the Army. They had their, from somewhere. I don't know where they came from, but we did have them, right.
So you had the supplies.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So,
how did you feel that these soldiers, did they want to learn English? Were they willing to, advance with the education?
this is interesting because never in my teaching experience have I witnessed such these soldiers I had for students. They wanted to learn, and we would test them out of grade levels up, and they would finish an eighth grade education within a couple of months. That's how amazing it was. So they were there to learn. It was, I never had that situation in all my teaching career as I saw there. They were willing and able to learn. I mean, they knew that education was important. So I appreciated that. That was easy teaching.
Did you have plenty of supplies when you were, on the front line or while you were teaching? Did you have plenty of supplies, like food supplies? What about, how did you did you sleep in barracks? What did you sleep in?
Well, we had tents there after the end of the war. Of course, before you foxholes and so forth, depending where you were. But after the end of the war, when they had tents, and it was comfortable considering everything. Mm-hmm. Our location, everything was really comfortable because in fact, our school unit, we had power, we had lights at night, we had a generator, and of course, like I said, we had the heat in the wintertime in these tents, so we were comfortable considering the area we were in compared to during the war. I didn't experience the winter outside like the troops did during the war because I was there in the spring of '53, and of course the war ended in July of '53. So I never experienced combat in the winter, thank goodness, like those other poor guys did.
Mm-hmm. Did you have the capability of cooking? Did they have mess halls and things like that for you during the time that you were teaching?
Yes, they did. We would walk to the neighboring company, and they'd have a mess tent, we call it, and then places to eat. Yeah, we would get our 3 meals every day. Yes.
Is there anything that you don't eat because of what you got in the mess tent or whatever?
Well, scrambled eggs and that we had. I don't go for those very often.
Did you get to take any R&R?
Yes, that was interesting. I enjoyed that. In fact, I was lucky and I had 2 R&Rs. And the first one was we would, I guess we went by truck down to Seoul, Korea, the airport, and we flew to Tokyo. There was another fellow and I went together from another teacher, right? He was from California. And we went that was during the Christmas, New Year's holidays, end of 53. And so we enjoyed that. You get a whole week at a hotel, and and you get to see the sights, and it was really nice. But they gave me one other R&R of August of 54, and I guess because they were keeping me over there, that wasn't a nice R&R too. That was different because we went by train down to Busan, which is the southern end of Korea, and then we got on boats and we went through the Japan inland sea, which was just a gorgeous scenery. You know, up to Kyoto, and we had, like I said, we had a whole week at a fancy hotel and swimming pools and whatever, just seeing the sights. And the interesting part about that, though, I didn't realize until later on, my sister, who was in the Air Force, a nurse, she was in Japan. She met her husband. He was in the Army, and he flew one of these little Cub planes, an artillery observer. And they met in Japan and got married, and they spent their honeymoon in the same hotel. And I didn't realize it till later on. That was interesting.
That is interesting, that you all had been at that same hotel
Right.
at some point.
Right, that was it.
Yeah. Did you bring anything, did you buy anything over there and have it sent back, or?
Well, this is a nice thing about R&R, right? I remember getting, the silverware and dishes, typewriter. They would mail it home for you. And because I had this money, we couldn't spend it in Korea anyway, so it was handy there on these R&R trips like that. You can buy all this, and then they would ship it home to you, to your parents, or in that case, I had a girlfriend, and she had her, ship a lot of things like that. So that was a nice situation there, and those R&Rs were really helpful.
Did you keep anything for good luck? Did you have, a cross or a lucky dollar bill or anything like that?
Still got my dog tags.
Your dog tags. Okay. How did you stay in touch with your family?
Just by mail. Everything by mail. That was the only way. And you sure appreciate letters, and when they came, that was really a very good situation then, right? Made you happy, right?
Did you have any entertainers come and visit you during the Korean War?
Yes, they would have USO shows show up, and of course, this is after the war. We didn't have anything at all. No. Where I was located during the war itself, it was nothing there. But after the war, we were entertained, and of course, probably the one outstanding one that I can remember is Marilyn Monroe. She put on a show for us, and that was something that you never forget.
You made the comment that there was one person that was in your unit that was from Illinois, and that you, to this day, stay in touch with that.
Yes, I stay with email. I'll send him email, and I did just a few years ago, I did drive up there to see him, and that was interesting, right? And
Is there anyone else that you stay in touch with from your unit?
there are a couple others that were teachers. I can remember in Pennsylvania, but the thing is, they're all dying off by now. They're not. I mean, the ones I've been very in touch with. There's just only a couple that are still living, and they're all dying off right now. Yeah.
And you mentioned that you went over to Puerto Rico. Have you ever been to any reunions with your company?
No, reunions. No, no.
Do you recall, you did mention that when you were discharged, you were in Chicago and that they asked you to join the reserves. Did anyone come up there to get you? Or how did you get home?
Oh, just by train to Taylorville. Just back there, we had the train service at Taylorville, and because I'll never forget because they would give you several days leave before the actual discharge, so you can go home right away. Because we took a troop ship to Seattle from Korea. Of course, I was hoping we would fly because some fellows were flying home, but it didn't happen. And then we did fly from Seattle to Chicago, and then just a matter of a day, they would let us go home for a few days, leave, and then come back. Well, that particular day I'll never forget because I got on a train to Taylorville, and I was anxious to see, of course, my parents and that. And of course, the train hit a vehicle on the way home, and it was 4 or 5 hours late getting to Taylorville. And of course, that was really kind of heartbreaking because you were all anxious to get home and you couldn't get there.
Did they know you were coming home?
Oh yes, they were there at the station waiting for me because I called them as soon as I got to Chicago at that time and told them I was coming home. And so they were there waiting.
When you were taking the ship home from Korea to Seattle, what was that like?
Going home was enjoyable. It was well, for one thing, I had a better situation than most of the troops going home because we worked on a ship newspaper, and this one fellow that was in our education center, he was being just sent home too at the same time. So we got on the boat early, one day early, and of course he was one of these fellows that made connections and somehow got us on the ship newspaper. So we had a better service on our way home.
That's the way to do it. You said that you worked on the farm and you taught school and you continued your education. Did you take advantage of any veterans benefits?
Well, when I got out service there, I just used the GI Bill for one semester college, and I just learned. I always want to learn how to fly, so I did learn how to fly under the GI Bill. But the rest of my education, of course, in line of, I had to pay for my own in many cases, but I was as a science teacher, because I taught chemistry, physics, and that I got a hold of these national science foundations. So it was just like the GI Bill because You would go to summer school, and they would pay for your tuition, books, and also room and board. So it worked out pretty nice, and that's I got the advantage of going to various colleges throughout the country. I would take advantage of. A lot of teachers wouldn't take advantage of these things, and I can see that on myself. Uh, I thought that it was very, very important, and I thought you might as well take advantage of it because, and in fact, my wife and I, we went together a few times. We went to Detroit, we went to Sacramento, California, different colleges. Uh, and then, of course, I went to New Orleans, and of course, I got a master's degree in chemistry from Wesleyan in Bloomington, going 3 years, 3 summers up there on this National Science Foundation. So, like I said, it was just like the GI Bill in a sense.
Did you ever take part in any kind of veterans associations, veterans organizations?
Well, yes, I belong to the VFW. What else? The Korean War Association has an organization. In fact, here in Springfield, we have one that meets twice a month at the Vet Center on 9th Street in South Grand. It's called a conversation unit, where we talk. And this is the others. Of course, they meet at night, like the VFW and what others do I belong to? I belong to several, but the DAV, out on the lake there. But I usually don't go out too much at this age at night. But the one at the Vet Center for the Korean War members, we have an organization. We just joined recently with the World War II veterans, because we're only a few of us, and so we thought we'd join with them. And it's a really called a conversational group that meets in the morning on 2 Thursdays a month, which is very interesting because the fellows let go. They talk out their war experiences, and it is fascinating. You learn a lot, and I really enjoyed that group of fellows. Yeah.
It's the museum that's downtown is the Korean War Museum. It's very interesting.
I'm glad to hear it's going to continue, because we thought we lost it completely. They're going to build this new one in New York, the national one, but they're going to keep the one in Springfield. So I'm very happy to see that.
That's very nice. Very nice. Has anyone ever thanked you for serving your country?
Not until recently, it seems like. I guess the first time I was really thanked, because all these years of teaching and that, and we just never talked about Korean War. But in 1993, my wife and I went down to Tennessee, retired down there, and of course we volunteered here at St. John's. We retired from teaching in '88 in Springfield here, but we volunteered at St. John's Hospital back then in '88. And then I just told my wife, I got to get away from the winters. It's got to go south. And we'd end up in Tennessee, at Crossville, Tennessee. We were there 15 years. And before we returned about 5 or 6 years ago, kind of my heart. We've got the best heart doctors here, or else I'd still be in Tennessee, because that is beautiful country down there and cheap living. But anyway, we volunteered always. We've different places. And one of the things I volunteered for the DAV down there as a driver for one of these vans. And then I drove about once a week to Nashville and Murfreesboro VA hospitals. And I'll never forget taking a group of veterans home from Murfreesboro VA hospital. At one of the towns coming home, the neighboring car next door was blowing a horn and waving and getting their attention, and roll down the window. And then the guys hollered out, wanted to thank us veterans. And that was the first time. I'll never forget that, being thanked. Since then, of course, the last few years here, there's many times I've been thanked and appreciated. Now, I was on return to Korea back in the 80s. I made 2 trips, in fact, to Korea already. I took advantage of those trips. At first, I didn't want to go because I could remember how it was. But the first trip, I was glad because everything's modern over there. It's it was beautiful in Korea. But like I said, I guess really there, I was really the first time I've been thanked by Koreans, though, because on the streets they would recognize that you were veterans, and they would come up with these Korean, both men and women, and hug you and thank you for what you did. And I was shocked because I didn't expect that. And they do that. They still appreciate us. And even on the second trip I did a few years ago, the same thing happened. But here in this country, they are recognizing, I think, more and thanking the veterans. I appreciate that.
When you went back to Korea, where did you go?
On the first trip, you mean?
On both trips.
Both trips, okay. Well, in Seoul, Korea, they would all you had to do was, I flew from Chicago on the first trip. Over there, you just had to pay for your flying. They would wine and dine you for a whole week in one of the fanciest hotels and tours. And we would go to Panmunjom. On both of those trips, I went to Panmunjom, and where they do the talks. They still talk today. We would go into the room, and they have a white line across these tables. We have that divides North Korea and South Korea, and we got to go on the North Korea side. But we would have tours like that, and like I said, they would have us. Shows, and they would really wine and dine the veterans. I'm ready to go again anytime, but I made 2 trips already. And in fact, the last trip, they paid half the fare, half the airfare, which a couple of years ago. And that was an interesting trip because there were 50 of us that went from Los Angeles. And when I got to the airport there in Los Angeles, talking to before we left, the fellows there with a couple of them from the Navy that were going on this trip. And they said, have you ever seen the movie 1,000 Men and a Baby? I said, never heard of it. Well, they were on this particular aircraft carrier. This is at the end of the war. Of course, they had to serve there in Korea, and they were hoping to go home, but they still had to stay around Korea and around the Incheon there, I guess it was, and the morale was really low on the ship, and they were telling me this story, and they said the chaplain who went to the orphanage there in Incheon and saw that all these little babies, there was one little white baby amongst all these Korean ones, and saw it wasn't being treated because it was the only white baby, and it wasn't treated correctly like the others were, and he came back aboard ship and told the captain about it. And the captain said, "Get me that baby." Well, after a few weeks, and of course, they did get the baby aboard the ship from the orphanage. And but the interesting part of the story was, oh, well, of course, like I said, they made a movie of it. The morale went up on the ship because all the guys got to take care of this baby. And what happened in the end, the doctor adopted the kid. Well, anyway, what made this trip very interesting, this last trip to Korea, he was with our group. He was a sports writer for the Spokane in Washington, state of Washington, and he retired already. And of course, he was doing social work and this type of stuff. But he and his wife both were on this trip. And I got to sit next to him quite a bit on the bus on these different tours and that. It was interesting. That made the trip really interesting to see that. And they made a movie of it. And of course, I got a hold of the movie afterward. I got home. And they changed the title, and I can't remember what the new title to make. But it was an interesting movie.
Is there anything else that you would like to add to your interview?
You mean to add or?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad I did all this. I'm glad I didn't do what my dad said, not go into service, because it was quite an experience. At the time, you wish you weren't there, but today, when I look back, it was a very good experience. And and another thing I mentioned at the time, I did not mention before, being on the farm. I never got involved with sports at schools. Maybe we got to Springfield here once or twice a year at the state fair. Thought that was really great. Never did any traveling. And I'll never forget traveling on these troop trains, troop ships. I enjoyed every bit of it because I love to travel. I found that I just it gave me a chance to travel, even though the situation wasn't very good many times. But of course, after I got married and so forth, we did go to Europe by ship in 1963, and on the Queen Elizabeth, and that was quite a different type of traveling than a troop ship. I enjoyed that too, but like I said, I'm always ready to travel. And then, of course, like I said, the U.S. Army gave me a chance to do that. Because I'll never forget this one woman I met at the VA hospital down in Tennessee. I took her on this van. She was a retired nurse, in the Army nurse. She was an Army nurse. And she mentioned at the time she tried to join the Navy as a nurse because she was already in nurses training, but they wouldn't take her because they had a full quota, I guess. Because she wanted to join the Navy to see the world, to do a lot of traveling. And so, but she ended up joining the Army, and I guess she did tremendous amount of traveling with the Army as a nurse.
It's amazing. Amazing. So your hat says the 60th anniversary of the Korean War. Did you go on a celebration that you received that? Where did you receive that hat?
I just received it right here amongst our members of the Korean vets here in Springfield. Just our one officer, president, he's the one who got these caps. I don't know where he got them from, but so that's what it is. Just it's like I said, celebration of the 60th. That was You know, July 27 was the end of the war, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Maris, I would like to take this time to thank you for the time you gave to our country and the time you gave serving our country. I would also like to thank you for the time you gave me today in sharing your story.
You're quite welcome.
I feel very honored, and I would like to thank you.
Okay, thank you too.